What does democracy look like? Civic action, civic involvement. And who does democracy look like? People just like you and me. Welcome to Women-Powered Democracy, a podcast series by the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. I'm Jane McMillan, a member of the League of Minneapolis. Women-Powered Democracy is your invitation to meet and be inspired by extraordinary League members powering positive change in our communities, our state, and our nation through their decades of League volunteerism and civic engagement. In this, our inaugural episode, you're going to get to know Kay Kessel, a woman truly powering democracy through her lifelong contributions to civic engagement. Kay was one of the first to answer the call of the Peace Corps. She dedicated her career to innovations in education, always prioritizing equity and justice for all. You'll get to hear about Kay's more than half-century of League activity. That, added to the force of hundreds of other League members and partners, helped pass some of the most significant and headline-making legislation in Minnesota, often doggedly staying the course for years to make it happen. And Kay has no intention of stopping. Now into her 8th decade, Kay Kessel remains as committed as ever to the League and to working toward the common good. So, with deep gratitude for her service, the League of Women Voters of Minnesota is proud to introduce you to Ms. Kay Kessel on Women Power Democracy. Kay, it's such a treat to have this time with you. Thank you. Let's start right at the beginning of your story. Are you a homegrown Minnesotan?
I am definitely a Minnesota native. I grew up in Elk River, which is now one of the second or third largest school districts in Minnesota. But when I was there, Elk River was just a little school district, about 80 people, and went to the University of Minnesota and studied home economics. I taught for a year and a half. And then Sergeant Shriver and John Kennedy came to the University of Minnesota, talked about the Peace Corps. So I sent in my application, and I was one of the first Peace Corps groups. So I was in Columbia for 2 years. And then I got a job in the Minneapolis schools in 1980 and was special ed teacher there and worked with refugees. And then I've got my master's and almost my PhD, and I became an administrator in the Minneapolis schools for 15 years, Washburn, Roosevelt, and then South High. I retired in 2002, so that's me.
It sounds to me like you have been aware of the world around you and civic needs from a very early age. What was the first time, do you remember, that you ever took notice of a civic issue?
I absolutely do. In Elk River in 1956, I was chosen to go to Girls State in Minnesota. It was over at the fairgrounds. School districts from all around the state sent one girl, and then we did the whole government thing. We learned about the House and the state and how to elect people, and we chose in 1956 an African-American, the only African-American young woman there. We chose her to be the governor. She came from Minneapolis, and I actually followed her up just recently, and she became a judge. She lives in another state. But that just lit the fire for government. And then in the schools as an administrator, of course, we had civics back then, and then civics stopped by our Minnesota legislature. And our League of Women Voters have just recently been able to work with the Republicans and the Democrats to get civics back in our high school curriculum because students need to learn about government. But I also was in charge of our student government as an administrator in 3 high schools, and I loved it. Working with these young students, they were just so smart and had this real talent and an interest for government.
So you've been involved from the get-go.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then your career in education. You've been in advocacy and interested in government and democracy all your life. But what led you to the League, and what did you find there that was unique?
I joined the League 54 years ago, right after I got married in 1970, 71. I was in the Minneapolis League of Women Voters, which had large numbers. And when I retired in 2002, 2 weeks later, my husband had a massive stroke. And I thought I was going to have a different kind of life, but I became a caregiver for almost 20 years. I kept my husband home with me. He went to a day program. During that time, I went over to the legislature and I was part of the League of Women Voters Action Committee for 16 years. It was the most wonderful experience to be there. And then I was not a caregiver, I was just me, you know. So I have been able to, even when I was a caregiver, I just was always able to stay in the mix. The League of Women Voters really helped me do that. We were so on top of so many issues. There were hundreds of women in 1970 because most of them were not working, but they were very involved in the community and so on. And we had all kinds of studies. One of the first years, Paula Goldberg, way back then, organized the Parents Action Coalition for Educational Rights. And now there are 100 people working at PACER. They helped really create a special ed system that's fair, but it hasn't always been fair. In my years in Minneapolis, when I was the assistant principal, the students that were in my acting out special ed classes were all African American. And that is just so tragic. We've had to really work hard to correct that system. And our Minneapolis League of Women Voters worked with the Minneapolis Health Department. We established school clinics in all of our high schools, and that came from our League of Women Voters educational studies, and even more recently, how civics should be back in our state curriculum.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, Kate, that was a win for you and the League. It was also a long time in the making, and that might be something that's missed by people, how agonizingly slow and incremental change is won sometimes governmentally. It takes perseverance. So, what are some of the other changes that you have worked long and hard for and have finally seen come to pass? And also, those things that you are still working for and will continue to?
Well, certainly the voting rights and access to people. For 10 years, I was part of the Restore the Vote with the League of Women Voters, and I co-chaired a forum. It was the League of Women Voters of Minnesota and 70 other organizations that wanted to restore the vote for ex-felons. So from that year until just this year, now we have restored the vote. That's kind of been my mission for 10 years. And we have climate change and immigration. It was almost 20 years that we have had to fight to have driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. And just this year, in this current legislature, it passed. And I want to mention Judy Stutzman, the woman that led an immigration study 20 years ago. In more recent years, probably the last 8-10 years, Judy Stutzman and State League women go to the citizenship ceremonies, and there are like 1,000 people at a time over in St. Paul. And so when they walk in, we hand out their voter registration card, and then they go in and they have the ceremony, and that ceremony is very emotional too. And then when they walk out, they're citizens and they sign that voter registration, and then we collect it right there. Judy Stutzman has these big boxes. She takes it right down to the state office. And so they become voting citizens immediately after. And there are 80,000 new citizens have been part of this whole movement. It's been one of my best activities is to go with Judy and just be part of that citizenship ceremony.
Oh,
Kind of
gosh.
makes me cry.
It sounds so gratifying and
Yeah.
very emotional. Yes.
And I want to mention abortion. It was 40 years ago, we adopted the position of being pro-choice. There are just so many things that we've accomplished that are now being threatened.
So you're still in it for the long haul, yes?
I really am.
That's
I
great.
really am.
You know, I've heard so many women in the league say it's about persistence, it's about the long game, and that they have faith in the process. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
more about that? How you've managed to keep your patience and keep working, and how the league helps with that?
Well, our league numbers are smaller now than they were back, in the 70s and 80s. So we have to collaborate. And like for that forum that we had, there was a organization, Take Action Minnesota, and there were 75 organizations, Jewish, African American, so many. You can't do it alone. You have to just, I think my talent and my legacy is just being able to link people. I became very involved in Isaiah, which is a religious organization, and it started about 10 years ago, and it was 10,000 voices, and it was Christian voices, Jewish, and now more recently, Muslim voices. We have worked together, and we are very powerful with the legislature, also working for GLBT rights, for environmental rights, for racial. So the league, we help bring people together. That was our gift.
And there's power in numbers.
Yes, yes,
Going back to when you joined the league,
yes.
do you recall what made you choose the League of Women Voters, and maybe what was going on in society at that time that you thought, this is the organization that's going to help me make a difference?
Well, my Unit 53 is over in Bryn Mawr, which is across 94, kind of separated. It's near north. And with my first couple of years there, we had 2 league members helped prevent that interstate from going through our neighborhood for many years. And then finally it did. It's just really tragic because not only did it happen over between North Minneapolis now, and the freeway has cut that, but it happened over in St. Paul by the Capitol. The freeway came in and it really broke down the communities. We just worked so hard, the league.
That was a disappointment when that freeway went through. It was a setback in what you had all been trying to do. So how do you keep going when it's a long game, when it takes patience, and when there are setbacks? What does the league provide as a group of women and citizens continuing the fight?
We met every month, and we never had small talk. I mean, there was always a big issue. It could be the parks, it could be education, restore the vote. We had Minneapolis issues, and then we had state issues too, and then national. There's not another organization like the League because we really tried not to be Democrats or Republicans. We tried to be very even-handed and be able to communicate. And it really worked until things just changed in our state. It changed within my own family. There just became divisiveness and people not talking to each other, but in families, much less, your neighbors and in your communities. And I just think that's our biggest challenge now. And And I think the League can help because we're not so political. We're more interested in issues such as education and such as voting rights, etc.
So the League has some unique characteristics that could meet this moment when
Yeah,
democracy is challenged by divisiveness.
absolutely.
What is that uniqueness? How would you describe that uniqueness?
Well, I think there's such a, a verve, there's such a interest, and our members just aren't going to stop fighting for this. Just like restore the vote, we just had to keep having meetings and connecting with other organizations to make something happen. And I think that's what we're doing now with climate change. Climate change has been very political. For instance, the pesticides fund a lot of our legislators, and neither the Democrats or the Republicans were willing to really address climate change and what is going to happen. And it's just taken just powerful connections, and I think we're going to really see climate change really addressed more.
And gosh, climate change is an issue really being taken to heart by young people. And we're seeing a wonderful youth movement right now,
Yes.
really taking on the defense of democracy. How would you like to mentor some of the young women and young people getting involved in preserving democracy? What would you say to them to get them to join you very experienced advocates of democracy in the League?
I think we have to work with African American organizations, the Native American, the Hispanic, the Asian, and at the University of Minnesota, there are all these different ethnic groups that are there, and we just have to keep connecting with the younger leaders. They are the answer to this, really.
If somebody said to you, well, the League, it's mostly older women, and would I fit in? Someone who's young and wants to get things done. And what would you say to them about joining the League, about what you all have to offer younger members? Maybe in lassoing their energy and they lasso your experience, or...
Yeah. Well, I'd like to find out what are their interests with the voting rights, or, with education or racial issues, or whatever. I've always invited younger people, and we always had a very good age mix in our unit 53. It's friendship too, and in this time where people have their public organizations, their faith groups, but I think the League has been such a strong community of like-minded people, and we have been able to show success. The Minneapolis League has gone into the social studies classes in the high schools and encouraged, some high school students are 18 and can vote, but to just encourage them in the government action. It's exciting.
You mentioned friendship. What personally have you gotten out of being affiliated with the League, and that you could describe to other people, other women in particular?
Well, one of my very best friends invited me to be in the League. That was Unit 53. And I think we're just very personally involved with each other. I have deep friendships from that, besides, being able to work together, but we can trust each other too. And I've also joined AAUW, Association of University Women of Minneapolis, and we have 350 women just in Minneapolis, but overall in the state, many more. And I've been going there for about 10 years. Every Monday, we work together with the League of Women Voters, and we have similar positions too. So I am incredibly happy and satisfied with my life up to this point because of my friendships, my deep friendships from these groups.
Listening to your life story in terms of civic advocacy, the Peace Corps, and being a leader in education and so involved in the community, some people might say that's heroic, and I think it is. But would you tell folks whether or not they have to be superhuman to make a difference, to join the league and make a difference?
Absolutely not. Because my husband had that stroke, and it just gave me the energy, to be outside of my caregiving, to really, I had the time, and I had the ability to do that. But it's just in our quiet times. We don't have to, you don't have to be splashy. You just have to keep staying, linking and talking with people. I'm just so proud of so many of our league members.
If I were to say to you, gosh, I'm just an average, everyday person, I don't have any special knowledge or skills, what would you tell me I had to offer to the league and to democracy?
Well, first of all, you can come and be who you are and express yourself and just come and learn. If you just wanted to be a lifelong learner, come to the League of Women Voters, because we really got in depth in any topic. And then we would take consensus on it. So your voice is counted. You don't have to be a leader. You could just have your voice counted in a bigger purpose, And I think people are finding they are so frustrated with what's happening right now. They're going to want their voice heard. Work with the league, work with some group that's working more for the common good.
So anybody who doesn't think maybe that one person's action might make a difference, you would tell them it really does.
Absolutely, it does.
Thank you, Kay. You have certainly made a difference and continue to. Join Kay Kessel as she works to protect the vote for immigrant and women's rights and racial equality. Follow her lead and collaborate with us for the betterment of your community. Plug into the power of the League of Women Voters. We'd love to have you as a member, a donor, a subscriber, preferably all three, because we are full steam ahead right now, securing and expanding the vote in current elections and for the critical 2024 contest. We're fighting mis and disinformation, and we are galvanized in getting the Equal Rights Amendment into the Minnesota State Constitution. So join us at LWVMN.org. Democracy looks just like you. And please do check back for new episodes to be inspired by more of the everyday yet remarkable members of the League of Women Voters of Minnesota on Women Power Democracy. I'm Jane McMillan.
This is what democracy looks like.